This is the installation video for the ZipPod foil assist motor mount. Today we're installing it to a foil drive. This is what the final product is going to look like. Your ZipPod installed at the elevation you normally ride at, attached with 3 zip ties, and covered in electrical tape are the cable fairings that go down the trailing edge of the mast. This is the end goal. So we will start with a bare mast, and we'll start with our, in this case, our foil drive motor. We're going to take out the puck. This is a V2 motor. We've also got a V1. We're going to take out our screws for the puck. If you're like me, your foil drive ball end Allen driver has rounded off. So I went and got a T-handle, 2.5 millimeter. It's still a ball driver, but it's fresh, so it's a little more grippy than before. I like this wrench because the swing weight it's got with the T-handle there. For V2, you will pull off your puck. You can save these screws. I am providing replacements because a lot of times these do get rounded out from that wrench. So you'll set the puck aside and use it again another day. If you wanted to do the same for the V1, it's the same process. Take the 4 screws out. And the V1 puck has a heat shrink that is the strain relief that holds the cable to this tail of the structure of the puck. And so if you gently wiggle that loose, you can also slowly lift the heat shrink. You don't have to cut this out. This is all reversible. If you don't like the ZipPod, you can reassemble it the way it was. But again, save the puck for another day. Be careful with the V1 because now you've got a cable coming in here without strain relief, but very shortly when you install it to your ZipPod and install that to the mast, this cable fairing guide will reinstate the strain relief and kind of protection of that. So just be careful when handling the cable, so you don't really fold it in half, but it's fairly robust. It's a heavy gauge pair of 3 wires. So that's it for the V1 motor. So we've got our V2 motor, we've got our ZipPod, and we double check that everything fits nice. Yours probably came with the hole plugs installed in the front just to show you how smooth it should be. You can take a little flathead screwdriver and pry each of those 4 out. You can set them aside. We'll use them at the very end. So step 1 is to figure out where to mount the ZipPod. And if you take a little piece of masking tape or some temporary tape, you make what you call a tape tab there. If whatever cable you choose, you install it to the connector, and you kind of envision how your cable would route up the back of the mast like normal. If you take that tape and install it right above where the ZipPod is, maybe leave yourself a millimeter or a 1/8 inch because you're going to bring the electrical tape buffer up that high. So we'll carefully pry that loose and set it aside. The next thing we're going to do is install a layer of tape for protection. And so because you want the cut edge facing backwards so it's not going to catch water and peel back, and you also don't want to double up the tape where the zip tie's at, start with your leading edge of your mast, bring the tape almost up to it, and without entrapping any air, you kind of line up the tape where your temporary mark was. So you get a nice smooth job there. And you want to kind of see how far to pull it. One trick is to, if you lick your thumb, it'll slide along and help squeegee out the air bubbles. So you just come till about there without cutting your mast. I have the worst knife in the world. Let's see. Alright, and then we check that the zip pod is going to fit, not too loose, not too tight. If it is tight, you can wet the surfaces of the tape either with a little bit of water or some soap. If it's loose, you can do that one more time with tape, like say you're mounting it in a higher position, or it's not guaranteed, but if you want to choose to try to mount it in the E-foil position, you might use a few reps of tape due to the taper of the mast. So that's where the zip pod's going to go. If you see that tape, we could use another layer right there to be safe. Right below that tape, without doubling it up, we're going to apply another layer. Again, you'll figure out the technique to kind of use your thumb as a squeegee to get the air bubbles out. So then our zip pod, if you take the V2 or the HP version, has 3 channels for zip ties. Because of the wider bolt pattern on the V1 motor, there's only room for 2 zip tie channels. So on the V2, I take the single zip tie, put it in the middle. The channel where the cable exits is what obviously you want to face down towards where the motor cable is headed. You want to install it at the elevation that you remember relative to the tape that you put on. You want to feed it through. You want to join it together. So that's just temporary. Get your zip tie horizontal. That one should be good. We're going to repeat that 2 more times. So you just feed that in one side. And insert it in the other. I wiggle it back and forth. We'll do that the 3rd time. You just check that they're about horizontal where you want. The zip ties will bite into the front of the mast where the electrical tape is. It helps them from moving around too much. So generally you just pull them as tight as you can. Wiggle back and forth until you don't hear them ratchet. You're not supposed to really pull them into the plastic deformation or the permanent stretch zone, but if you pull it a few more clicks, just make sure they're snug. So now that our tape that protects the mast has been applied, we're going to take the zip pod. Now the V2/HP design, because of the bolt pattern, there are 3 channels equally spaced for zip ties. On the V1 motor, because of the bolt pattern, there's only 2, a pair of them in the center where there's more real estate. So you'll take a zip tie and feed it down the center of one of these channels. And you'll feed it down the side of the center channel. The notch which has the cable exit will obviously face where the cable's going. That's towards the base unit. You're going to remember how much margin you had above the zip pod to where your tape is installed. If you remember, I had like 1 millimeter or about 1/8 inch. It's not super critical, but you want to be pretty much where you're supposed to be. If the fit is snug, that's good. If it's too snug, you can lubricate the tape with either like a drop of dish soap or just a little water or spit. But it doesn't have to sit perfectly friction fit. If you want, you can try another layer of tape if it's not the perfect fit. Like if you're installing it higher than, maybe it's designed for, like in the e-foil position, you could wrap a few layers of tape like people had done with the other motor mounts. So you'll take a single zip tie in the middle, and you'll kind of make sure it's horizontal and about facing the way you want. The zip tie will bite into the front, so before you snug it up, you kind of want to make sure it's where you want. And I just do it by hand until I can't pull anymore. Make sure it's where you want relative to your tape, and then you go ahead and install the other two. I'll install that one loose. You're feeding them into the notches. They don't have to be perfectly parallel, but if you have attention to detail like me, you'll make them that way, and then best bet is to pull them by hand to get all the slack out. And then don't cut yourself or anything, but what I do is without ripping them in half, I'll take some pliers, I'll just tug them like 1 or 2 clicks more. Again, you don't want to stretch any zip ties into the plastic region of the part. So it should be pretty snug against bending. That's a good check. Yes, there's some flexibility in the zip ties. There always will be. They're not infinitely rigid. What you want to do is have them preloaded. You want some stretch, kind of like an alternator belt in a car, where they have like a rule of thumb that it's properly tensioned when you can twist it halfway and no more. It's kind of like that. So just use your judgment. I mean, nothing terrible is going to happen if you are a few clicks off. And after that, the zip pod is installed, and you would go mount your motor and route your cable just like before. Almost just like before. What I do is with some side cutters, I clip those off, and you can use a knife to reach in there and cut the tail off without cutting your hand off. What I found, and actually what I designed the notches for, so they fit baby fingernail clippers. So if you go and you just nibble the tail off where it's below flush, the top two are easy to get recessed. That bottom one is right below where the cable connector support is. So I cut that one flush. Alright, and you can fit check that with the cable if you take it off the motor. Go ahead and make sure like you can push it and it's flush. And if you want to, you could verify that your height is right. Plug it in there, stick it in there. See if you can slide the cable fairing up under the motor. So that looks good and nominal to me. What next? We're going to install the motor. Got the V2 motor. Follow the manufacturer's instructions for grease. Double check your O-ring is there. So what you do is, I'm giving you 4 new screws, stainless 304 to replace the factory ones, because again, sometimes they get rounded out. And I don't want your screws getting stuck in there due to worn out tools and worn out screw interface. So I do suggest getting a fresh Allen wrench. If you don't have one, maybe you already noticed yours is a little iffy. What I did was I put electrical tape right here. So if you got an Allen wrench that's got a good fit to the new screws I gave you, then the trick I do to keep the Allen wrench centered in this deep counterbore is I wrapped it with electrical tape. So it helps it so you're not inserting blind. If you if you do that, it kind of helps you, at least it gives you something to pivot so you can get it centered. So if I do this horizontally like so, I'll get one screw in there, and at least I know I'm holding the motor up. You want your screw to be on the high side so that gravity's not like prying the motor harder on the screw. So I'll get one started. A rule of thumb for any screws, if you can turn your wrench backwards, hear that? You hear it click every time. So you know you're not like cross-threading your bolts. And you know they're actually sitting at the beginning of the tapped hole. So I always do that, like just muscle memory. You can see if you reverse. Okay, and then I go forward and it grabs it. And the last screw, and you never put the first screw in tight for anything you ever do. You always leave it finger tight or loose. So you can see all 4 screws are engaged. I slowly, lightly torque all 4, and then I'll come back around. It's very subjective here. Just use whatever torque your normal installation is. There's no tried and true minimum and maximum, but obviously there's too tight and you'll never get the bolts out. So your screws are in, your stator is attached, your cable is captured, albeit temporarily installed to the electrical connector. I pull that out. Everything looks good, and then now you'll take those hole plugs. You basically shove them in backwards. They should be somewhat of a friction fit. If they're a very tight friction fit, there's a little notch here you could use and just bump them backwards if you wanted to really be sure. And then you could also use that notch, you know, when you're disassembling, very carefully so you don't scratch your mast. Just tap it forward. That opens up a little hole here that you can just pry them out. But installation should just be a slide in. 1, 2, 3, 4. So your zip pod's in, and now you would just proceed like normal. With these that I include in the kit, you're able to buy them separately too if you just want to use the standard foil drive motor mount. I've been using these cable fairings for the past year before I conceived the zip pod. You slide on the motor first. Once the motor's in place, depending on the height of your motor mount and how wide the base of your mast flares out, like the code is a massive flare down here. Armstrong Performance not quite as much. Others like the KT are pretty much straight all the way down. So you just figure out however many, you can pull the cable out, figure out how many of these things you want to fit in here. Like this starts to spread out at the bottom, so I'll go back and I'll get a 1/2 inch one. So that's going to be my arrangement. And I am ready. If I'm properly cleaned and re-greased here in my 3-pin connector, the other trick is to leave the cable outboard a little bit. And then you can so now that we got the stator attached to the mounted zip pod, your cable installation and routing can be per normal with the rubber trailing edge guides that Foil Drive offers. In your kit, I've made a little more streamlined, rigid, sharper trailing edge assortment. So you'll slide the motor one up, and then you'll figure out, based on the height and the shape of your mast, are you going to fit a pair of 1-inch guides, or are you going to just do a 1.5 inch, which is probably what I'm going to do here. Okay, and then what you do here is, with the cable outboard of the guide, it gives you a little more service loop. You can come in, press your connector down, you can wait to screw it in, and you just kind of massage everything together. Do a little inspection. These things will follow the trailing edge of the mast, so you want them shoved up against the motor. And this is ready for tape. You might clean your mast if there's any grime or finger oil. So that sharp trailing edge is what gets us a wrinkle-free tape installation, and it'll be smooth all the way around. So we're done with our marking tape. We can go ahead and, where are these are the, just like normal. Install all 3 screws, lightly torque them down equally. We are done with the Allen wrench. We're done with the excess cable guides. We can save our old motor bolts if we wanted to reuse them one day. And we're ready to do taping, whereby all we need is a knife. And actually, I'll do it upright so you can see better. So we'll take our tape that hopefully has a nice clean edge. I'm going to cut a new edge without getting dirt on it. Again, same as we did before, we want the trailing edge of the tape, the cut edge, to be facing backwards, which means we're going to install the first piece of tape at the front, routing backwards. We're going to get leading edge nice and straight. We're going to lick our thumb, work the air bubbles out like you do with like a bumper sticker or surf decal. The tape stretches. You don't want to pull it too much. It gets skinny. That's called Poisson's effect, when you lengthen something and the material has to go somewhere so it gets skinnier. You see where our leading edge was, we want to wrap over that just a little bit. I cut in the middle so the tip of the knife can go in, and then I cut outward so I don't wrinkle it up too bad. I got it wet there, so I'm going to dry it. If we're lucky, we can use one piece of tape here. You could either do a second wrap, or if you have smaller 3/4 inch electrical tape, you could do that too. Again, practice your technique to get the air bubbles out. You know, starting in the middle with a wet thumb, working up or down, in and out. I pull it tight and I let it relax a little. And I am going to go one more full wrap to cover that up. I'm not going to cut it, but I am going to pull out and angle down a few degrees. Like that. Nope. So again, a lot of people just whip this together real fast. I take a little more time, a little more perfectionist to get rid of the wrinkles. And remember, we're going to cover this up. We're going to wrap around the front of the mask so that our cut edge faces backwards so it doesn't collect that water pressure when we're writing. A little bit low on the mask, so I'm going to stretch it and try to install it on the way back up. Okay, and before I get to the back edge somewhere, once I've overlapped my leading edge, not too bad. It's pretty fluid. I haven't had a problem yet with water like getting inside this little wedge. Some people like put some hot glue or that moldable softening plastic. I think it's overkill. You don't really need to, but so there's your zip pod. If you want to, you can do some pull test. It's got a little bit of, actually that's my mast moving laterally. It's really locked in there. Up and down, if you want to do that, you can see how much flex the zip ties have. But again, you're motoring, this is pushing forward, and then zip ties are capable of 150 pounds of force dragging, and this bullet shape just can never feasibly develop that going through liquid. All right, she's done.